first big businessman. He began working at the age of 11 for his father, ferrying people across New York Harbor. By the age of 16, he started his own business with his own boat, a small skiff, doing the same work, which is where, when he was 16, in jest, he got the nickname Commodore. But as he saw the need and opportunity, he kept building, he kept growing, until he ultimately dominated shipping in early America. Not content with that, though, he ventured out further into transatlantic shipping just as that was becoming profitable. Right in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, transporting all these goods back and forth across the ocean because he understood the role of transportation in commerce before everyone else did. Now, this was important because despite his immense wealth and his success, he sold his shipping business and got into railroads and ultimately dominated that field as well for years. So we need to consider, though, what caused Cornelius Vanderbilt to let go a successful business in shipping and go into railroads. Vision. He recognized the landscape, he understood the principles, and he saw the future. And this ended up transforming our country, even though he, of course, never held public office. Now, while this example falls in the very tangible world of business where success can be measured in dollars, the reality of what vision means to leadership cannot be underestimated in any realm, and that includes spiritually. Vision is about seeing what others do not yet see. Nehemiah gained permission from the king to return to his homeland and began building the walls of Jerusalem. Now, what we have to keep in mind without reading ahead and knowing the rest of the story is that when he arrived, the reality of the devastation must have been tremendous. He goes out, he's surveying the damage. He's seeing a city that's still rubble. They've rebuilt the temple, but that's really, other than that, they're just kind of vulnerable. Nehemiah intentionally went out to see how bad the damage was, to see it himself. But in the process of going out, traversing along the areas of where the walls were that were all broken down, and seeing that damage, Nehemiah also saw something else. He saw what could be. Vision. And that is what makes Nehemiah such a great example. So as we turn now to Nehemiah chapter 2, I want us to consider what exactly others miss that a leader with vision sees. We will be going through this text and noting from Nehemiah's own example what it was he had that we need to have as leaders today. First of all, visionary leadership sees problems to be solved. And by the way, I want to emphasize that last part is important. It doesn't take vision just to see problems. The vision is in seeing problems to be solved. Verses 1 through 3. And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, that I took the wine and gave it to the king. No, I had never been sad in his presence before. Therefore the king said to me, Why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of heart. So I became dreadfully afraid, and said to the king, May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste, and its gates are burned with fire. Now you have to remember that Nehemiah, as we saw in chapter 1, was the king's cupbearer. What that means, if you're not familiar with that term, is that he was the one who tasted all the food and drink that the king had to make sure it was safe. So if he's not looking so happy when he's coming up before the king gets worried, thinking that he knows something about the food he's about to serve him. So that's the reason for the question on the king's part. He's saying, wait a minute, why don't you look so good here? And that's when Nehemiah says, I've got a problem. But he doesn't say it with disdain. He doesn't say it as if the world's coming to an end. Nehemiah is thinking, there's a problem here that I want to solve. And that is important when we're talking about visionary leadership. When we see this as problems to be solved, leaders then, and this is an important understanding, do not accept the status quo. When you think about what we find Jesus himself doing in John chapter 2, verses 13 through 17, he didn't just look out and see people as they were and accept everything. He didn't just go out and say, okay, this is fine. He sees a problem, something that needs to be taken care of. You see regularly passages in which Jesus is looking out and he sees them as sheep having no shepherd. That's stating that there is a problem here that the right shepherd can help with. Solve. There's a problem. But we have to realize then that just because things are as they are does not mean that they always have to be that way. A leader doesn't just accept that this is how it must be. He has a better and bigger thinking than that to say there's something wrong with this. This is not right. It can be improved. It can be fixed if we just apply the right work to it. And a leader looks and he sees, yes, there's this problem, but we don't have to accept it. Also, as he sees this problem, he spends time thinking about, okay, what do we have to do? Nehemiah had already put time into thinking about this. He had heard the report in chapter 1, and now he's already approaching the king. He's already thought long and hard about what he wants to do about it. He spent time with it. He spent time in prayer about it. And this is what we have to recognize goes with it. In Esther chapter 4 and verse 16, Esther, remember, sets aside 3 days and asks for prayers. And this is solely to try to figure out for herself, when she knows and has accepted the challenge to go before the king, even though she's not been called, how do I do this to address this problem that we have? That we as the Jews are going to be under attack and Haman is out there trying to hurt us. How can I do something about it? 3 days. And when you see what she ends up doing, you see that took some thought to figure out. So it's not just that you just, okay, I don't accept it, let's go do something. Let's think about what can be done, what can work. Leaders also, though, they visualize this situation. They have to know what they're working with. And so a leader has to go about and see, okay, here's the situation. Notice that he didn't sugarcoat it. How can I possibly not feel bad when I know that back home, here's the situation. My homeland, my capital city, is in ruins. He doesn't in any way get away from here's the problem, and it's a really bad problem. So he sees it, he assesses it accurately, he looks at it historically, as we would see that you'd have to look and say, okay, how do we get to this point? And that's an important part of all this. You see, where are we? What happened that got us here? And also to say, you know what? Personally, I need to be able to appreciate this problem too. In Luke chapter 18, verses 31 through 33, Jesus is trying to get his disciples to see, here's what I see in my future. And he's telling them about going to the cross. And I'm on the way to Jerusalem, as we all are, but I'm heading there to be killed. But he doesn't end it there, because he's seen ahead and to be raised again. You see, he understands the problem. He looks back, he knows why we were in the problem, but he also is looking in terms of the solution. You see, but leaders also then see beyond that problem. They see all that problem, they're aware of the problem, but they see beyond it. Because they see how things ought to be. Here's how things are, and they see the difference of here's how things ought to be. How do we get there? Acts chapter 8, verse 4, people were persecuted in the early church, and they went everywhere preaching the word. You see, that was actually God solving a problem of getting the world the message. Problems are as big as we let them be. I want everyone to stop and think about this. When you put in your life in a context of what God has made possible, problems are as big as we let them be. But here's the second part of that. Solutions are as big as we allow ourselves to dream. We sometimes treat our problems as bigger than the solutions we can manage, and that's why we keep having the same problem. When we put the problem in perspective and start thinking big about the solution, we can get past the problem. And that's what visionary leadership does. Leaders, it is your integrity, your determination, your perseverance, your confidence, and your faith that changes a problem into a vision. Keep that in mind. Second of all, verses 4 through 6, visionary leadership sees purpose to be fulfilled. Here we continue our account. Then the king said to me, "What do you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it." Then the king said to me, the queen also sitting beside him, "How long will your journey be? And when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Purpose to be fulfilled. I have a reason why I'm doing this. Now, I want you to think about how important that is for every action that we take. Here is my reason for why we do this. Purpose. And a lot of times we lose sight of that purpose. We are not anymore anchored to our purpose, and we don't understand ourselves, and that's why we lack energy, we lack motivation, we lack zeal, because we're not anchored to purpose and why we do things. Vision is another way of expressing how you understand your real reason for existence as an organization, as a congregation of God's people. If a leader doesn't see this, there's no way then he can point others to it. He has to see it. And if he can't point others to it, he can't be effective as a leader. Because that's what is important to get this across in leadership. Fulfilling purpose. The leader fulfilling his purpose and helping others see there is purpose to be fulfilled. Spiritual leaders then see their work in terms of spiritual meaning. In Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13, there at the end of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, "What then is the conclusion of the whole matter? Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty," or really meaning of man, existence. Here's purpose. And to see and understand this is what life is about. This is what our work is about. This is what you should be about. This is what we should be about. If we don't understand purpose, I exist to do this. I exist to save other people's souls. I exist to help others go to heaven. I exist to teach. I exist to glorify God. If we don't understand purpose behind everything we do, then we're not going to really think in big, grand ways. We just see ourselves as moseying on through life, stumbling along here and there, and we don't see that there is something bigger here. We lack vision. And we can't see what we really need to see about ourselves. Leaders take ownership of the problem, and then that solution becomes their purpose. Here we've got this going on. Here's our problem that we've already considered. Part of my purpose now becomes to solve that problem. I want to be the solution. In Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 8, when Isaiah is called, the problem is presented to him about, here's where the people are, and it's terrible and how horrible it is. and how sinful people are. And Isaiah says, here am I, send me. I want to be part of the solution, he says. I want that for purpose. And that became his purpose. And he lived with that purpose in mind. Leaders, do not wait for opportunities to fulfill your purpose. Leaders, create opportunities. I want you to think about it in terms of Exodus chapters 5 through 12. Moses, under God's instructions, goes back to Pharaoh with a simple message, actually, purpose. You remember Moses' purpose? It's encapsulated in these simple words, let my people go. Moses had to act in order to initiate purpose. He had to do something to get that purpose. He was acting and doing what God told him to do, but because he was committed to it, here's my purpose, I act, and ultimately in a grand way, he let them go. It took a lot of work, and there were a lot of heartaches for Moses along the way, but he was understanding this is my purpose that keeps him at it. Ultimately for 40 years, and remember, he had to deal with a lot in that time. Leaders, if you have a small purpose, you can only achieve small things. If you see your work, though, in light of eternal purpose, and I don't mean this blandly, I mean very specifically, here's what we're doing, and we have eternity in view. That's what makes it possible for God to do amazing things through you. Because you're doing his will, because you're looking all the way down into eternity to accomplish it. If we just kind of go around week to week and our basic job is just to try to get here on Sunday, we're not seeing far enough down the road. Our vision is short-sighted. We need to see big and be able to think in terms of years and people and changes and heaven. Number 3, visionary leaders see plans to be implemented. Verses 7 through 10. Furthermore, I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, which pertains to the temple, for the city wall, and for the house that I will occupy. And the king granted them to me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Then I went to the governors in the region beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard of it, they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. Did you see how much he had thought through what would be necessary to accomplish what his purpose was? He saw the problem. He knew certain things had to be, this is what I've got to do. This is now who I am, purpose. But now I have to have a plan. I have to know how to get from here to there, and in order to get done what I want to accomplish. I need a plan. And visionary leaders understand they can't just go out there and say, oh, I wish this would always happen. Visionary leaders plan for it to happen. And if you don't have a plan for it to happen, then it's not a goal, that's a dream. That's a wish. And we got to get away from wishes in the church. Oh, I wish we would grow. Then let's have a plan to grow. Those are two very different things. Leaders then plan for success, not failure. Do you know that failing on this never entered the picture for Nehemiah? That's not ever a consideration for him. Why? Because the plan is always, what does it take to succeed? In Joshua chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, you see him giving these instructions to the children of Israel. They have just crossed into Canaan. They've already been successful at Jericho, and then they had a setback at Ai. And this caused the whole situation with Achan and the necessity of discipline for him. But at that time then, after they have failed miserably and lost a lot of people at Ai, Then in Joshua chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, Joshua comes back and says, here's what we will do. And he lays it out and says, here's how we're going to take this. You think in human terms, they just gotten beaten badly. He doesn't speak in terms of, well, no, I don't want you to, I know they hit us bad this last time. He doesn't deal with that. It is, here's how we succeed. Here's how it's getting done. A plan then involves organizing your thoughts, considering the obstacles, and anticipating, and here's the tough part, anticipating what is necessary to be successful regardless. You can have a plan, it's one of those perfect kind of plans that is if everything goes your way, everything will be fine. But you know what, in life, few times does everything perfectly go your way. You've got to be prepared to deal with the problems and anticipate them along the way. And that's how you plan for success, because you know that there will be something that comes up that doesn't fit in with your plan. A plan then sees that big picture, but puts pen to paper with the details necessary to make that plan succeed. Also, leaders think long term and plan for the long term, which what Nehemiah was doing here in verse 8. He's looking on ahead. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 16 through 18, remember how Paul was thinking about his work? And Paul was probably, we tend to think about this as being almost fatalistic when he's talking about himself. And my light affliction, which is but for a moment, which works to be a more perfect, it says he's looking into eternity. Why? Because the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. That's what I'm looking at. He didn't say that at the end of his life. He said that talking about why he did things even though it might cost him his life. It's worth it. Why? Because I've got a bigger plan. I've got a plan beyond me. Vision. You see, to do this, though, to have vision, leaders, you cannot simply borrow someone else's ideas and vision of what to do. Because rarely is your situation going to be the same as someone else's. That doesn't mean you can't see what other people are doing and get ideas. But here's the thing, you can't just react to other people's ideas. You have to have ideas. You have to show your thinking about your situation and your problem and your success and the people's success that you lead. And that means you first have to know yourselves and be willing to see the possibilities and then plan for the future. You've got to see it. Leaders then, and we look at this in verses 9 and 10, leaders persevere despite the fact that there's opposition there. We talked about Moses coming out and through the 10 plagues, coming out, crossing the Red Sea, then after that, and they were delivered from Egyptian bondage. And then they celebrate this in the Song of Moses in Exodus 15. Do you know what happens right after this? They've crossed the Red Sea. It's been a great victory. You know what you get to when you get to Exodus 16? The people are complaining about Moses as a leader and want to go back. I'm trying to figure it out if they expected him to part the Red Sea so they'd go back over. That's what they wanted. They've experienced all this, and all of a sudden, I can't see it, we got to go back. You will have critics. If you don't have critics, you're not a leader. Someone will find something wrong with every plan you have and every dream you dare to dream. Now, I'm not talking about legitimate scriptural objections. We're talking about something else here. It's the difference between looking for who we are going to be and what it takes to be able to save souls and get people to heaven who are around us today, and to see what we can become as a congregation now and in 5 years, in 10 years, instead of spending our time thinking about what we were as a congregation yesterday and 10 years ago and 20 years ago. If you're going to spend your time on that, then I suggest you need an historian, not a leader. And there's a big difference. Leadership requires a commitment to the dream that sees the plan through reality. You got to see it through reality. You can't deny the reality of what you're dealing with, but you've got to see beyond that. So be ready then. Here's what happens. You've got to be ready to persuade people to accept the vision instead of backing off from the vision because others do not see it or don't care. You have to assume from the beginning that not everyone gets it. The fact that you get it first is what makes you the leader. Your job is just beginning, though, with the idea. Leaders, you cannot afford to try to make things up as you go, because if you're failing to plan, then you're planning to fail. Number 4, verses 11 through 16. Visionary leadership sees progress that needs to be made. So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, nor was there any animal with me except the one on which I rode. And I went out by night through the valley gate to the serpent well and the refuse gate, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem which were broken down and its gates which were burned with fire. Then I went to the fountain gate into the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal under me to pass. So I went up in the night by the valley and viewed the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests and nobles, the officials, or the others who did the work. This is a very important part about having vision, that he wanted to see what progress needed to be made first before he approached anyone. That first ought to tell you then that to understand progress, leaders have to work behind the scenes to assess the problem and then evaluate what is needed, or you won't know when progress is being made. You need to know where you're starting from with individuals as well as the big picture. You need to know what the starting place is, or you're not going to appreciate that, hey, they've made some positive steps. We're making progress. You got to know where you are. Because if you don't know the weaknesses and the strengths of the people and programs where you are, you cannot make progress. You can't. And that is why it's essential that leaders think in terms of growth rather than maintenance. Not keeping what we have, but building upon what we have. There is such a distance between those two ideas, I cannot begin to describe it. Because if you only think in terms of maintaining what you have, you will keep all your problems and you will limit your future progress by the nature of what you're trying to do. Leaders then examine the problem realistically before deciding what realistic progress to expect. That's verses 13 through 15. You have to kind of take a look at what you've got and what you're dealing with. In Matthew chapter 17, once again we find Jesus, verses 20 and 21. So Jesus said to them, "Because of your unbelief, this is why they could not cast out a demon. For assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting." You realize that within this text is the recognition that you underestimated how difficult the problem was. You've got to know what you're dealing with so you can assess what constitutes progress. Sometimes it may be slow. Sometimes there may be a tough situation. And sometimes the workload is too much for the people you have. You have to know where you are and what's possible, or you will end up having the wrong kind of vision for your situation. Leaders also visualize the progress required from the beginning. And when I say from the beginning, I mean long before bringing it to the people. And that is each and every step. Think it through, have the plan, know what progress is necessary, and now that we've got that in hand, now we're prepared to go to them with it. Because otherwise, we go to them and we see the problem, we have this idea, and we go to them and say, Here's what we want to do. And they say, okay, what do we do? And the answer is, I don't know. And so we don't do anything. And this is why we have to have this assessment for progress first. In Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 12, there the writer goes to the people, and he is not exactly easy on them. When he says, when for the time you ought to be teachers, you have need that one teach you again the things which be the first principles of the oracles of God. He had done a lot of assessing about where they were, where they should have been, and why there was a difference. And that was the foundation for his critique, not just in that one verse in Hebrews, but really for the whole thing. Leaders, spend time thinking about what every member could be with the right incentive, with the right guidance, and the right assistance. And then you realize the next part is get busy getting that right. Number 5, visionary leadership sees programs to involve people. Verses 17 and 18. Then I said to them, you see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste and its gates are burned with fire. Come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer be a reproach. And I told them of the hand of my God which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. So they said, let us rise up and build. Then they set their hands to this good work. Now, from the very beginning, let's start in realizing, had those people who'd been living there long before Nehemiah arrived, did they not realize the state the city was in? They lived with it every day. The difference was how Nehemiah cast the vision about the situation. For them, it was just reality. For Nehemiah, as he presents it now to them, it becomes a challenge. And one worth taking up, saying we can do it. Because he did his homework. In visionary leadership, seeing programs, we have to understand what a program really is. Programs, a lot of times, we think of programs in the wrong way, and therefore we expect things from programs that programs can't do. Leaders communicate their vision to the people to motivate them, both by pointing out the problem and offering the solution. Both. You notice he comes in and says, do you see what we got here? You see what we're dealing with? You notice that he was very honest and upfront about here's a problem we've got. And he took it to the people who really should have already been working on it. But he had no problem saying, you look around, you see this, what we have, and then says, let's do something about it, and here's what we're going to do. Why? Because that's motivating. Solutions are motivating. Problems are not. In Genesis chapter 15, 13 through 16, in casting a vision for Abraham, the Lord in this conversation with him is reiterating the promise, the seed promise to him. But then in promising that he's going to have this people, they're going to be as the stars of the sky, which by the way, did you see they discovered some hiding galaxies recently? We got even more stars out there. The stars, the sky, the sand. And he's telling them this, and then he says, but here's what's going to happen. They're going to end up, and they're going to be in Egypt, and they're going to be enslaved. But then I'll bring them out to this land. What a challenge it must have been to Abraham to hear this as God trusted him enough to give him a big, broad picture. You realize what he did is he laid out a part of the scheme of redemption for Abraham, his part. You have a role to play in all this. Here's what can be. Here's what will happen. Leaders encourage involvement by revealing the types of things that encourage them. Nehemiah explained, it was very short, but he talks about that what God had done for him already in making it possible. Now he's recounting a situation of what even got him to where he could be in Jerusalem. That's part of this. But in also what he is saying, in calling on them to do, he's telling them, here's what God has done, here's what the king has said. Therefore, the only thing that's holding us back is us. Permission is not an issue. We've got that. You want materials? I've got the permission to get the materials. We've got that. What do we need? We need you. And that's what a program is actually all about. In 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 12, in understanding that kind of motivation, think about this for yourself. Paul says to Timothy, I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed to him against that day. These are some of Paul's last words. I'm about to die. Doesn't matter one bit. Matter of fact, I'm ready. That's what he said at the end. But the way things are going, you need to know this. It's worth it. He is putting his purpose and his own motivation, and he's wanting Timothy to get hold of that, to get the zeal and energy that comes from that and say, this matters. You see, leaders do not simply create a program of work. I think sometimes that we get that impression. We think that's how it works. It doesn't work that way. Leaders work with the people in the work of the program. And that's where it gets its energy and vitality and strength. Let us rise up and build. That's a very different statement from, y'all get busy now. Two different things. One is, here's my vision, y'all make me get this where it works. The other is, this is our vision, let us make it happen. Because he was there. They weren't all doing the same kind of work. Nehemiah was a leader. He was a governor. He was doing a lot of different things. But because of being there with them and providing what he could and being around them and understanding those people, there was never going to be any doubt that they were in it together. Whatever they were doing differently, it was all for the same purpose, the same cause. Why? Because they had the same vision. That was the vision that Nehemiah brought to them. Let us rise up and build. Is it as a vision about presence? I know who I am now, the people can say. I know what I am to do now. I know what my role is, and I know what's expected of me. One of the things that holds back most programs a lot of times is people not understanding what's expected of them and why. There's not accountability because there's not any understanding of accountability and purpose, and here's why this matters. Leaders in this way then can build camaraderie among the people they lead because the people view them as someone that's one of them while still leading them. Leaders then create a sense of ownership among the people of any program because the people now understand the value of that program themselves. This is where we have to get. It can't be Kevin's program. Kevin's program will fail every time. Here I go, create this, organize this, here you go. That will fail every time. The elders put together a program. Here we go, put it out there. It'll fail every time. What makes things work is when it is not Kevin's program, it's not the elders' program, it's our program. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody was part in the same role of it, but understanding that you have value in this and that to make this work, it may just be a great idea, but an idea needs people and people who are committed and understand, yes, we can do that. That's what makes things go. That's what makes a church successful. That was what makes people go and do and offer more. Things that I know some of you already are doing, many of you. And to realize there are other things that we could do, and the thing is getting to do the right thing for the right purpose, for the right reason, with the right vision. And that's when we begin transcending what we are and becoming what we can be. Ephesians chapter 2, 8 through 10. in a context that is focused on God had to be at the point offering salvation for us to do anything. He says, by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. Not of works, lest any man should boast. But now listen to this. For ye are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that you should walk in them. God had works, activities in mind for every single one of us, and our involvement in those ongoing is as much a response to the grace of God as our baptism is. And understanding this is who we are as a people. Leaders, your job is not just to create and announce a program. Your job is to build people who understand the value of the goal and then provide the organization necessary to make it happen. That's a program. Number 6, verses 19 and 20. Visionary leadership sees prosperity in the future. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? So I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build, but you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem. Nehemiah was a bold leader. He did not mind saying what needed to be said. In looking toward prosperity, of course, we're not talking financial. We're talking a good path for the future. Leaders view unreasonable criticism as motivation for perseverance rather than as a reason to stop. You realize how many times Jesus was criticized and approached and told to stop what he was doing? John 7, verse 48 is one example. What did he do? He kept on doing. Matter of fact, he used it as an opportunity to question them, and he turned the tables on them. Philippians 3, 13 and 14, Paul writes, brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do. Forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth into those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. You see, Paul saw the future, and he saw it was bright. A lot of times, we get so caught up in what's going on this earth that we lose sight of the prosperity of the future, and we don't do what we ought to do. We aren't working toward what really matters because our mind isn't there. Spiritual leaders then move forward on faith. Always. That's what Nehemiah was doing. He was moving forward based on what God said. For we walk by faith and not by sight. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. And that's important, again, in 2 Corinthians. That's just after Paul had talked about the willingness to die and the preparedness to die and the situation in which it was very possible he could have died. And his whole thing is that we're not looking around and seeing what I think about this. We're seeing what God says to do, what God says to become. That's faith. Spiritual leaders then view themselves as servants first. God's servants and servants of the people. Remember in Mark chapter 10, 45, Jesus says, the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. Servants. Why? Because there's burdens. Servants bear burdens. And there's a burden in leading because of all the things that you're carrying that other people don't have to carry. And the vision is one of them. See, leaders, and here's, I think, perhaps one of the most challenging things. Leaders, you got to remain positive and optimistic, even in the face of opposition. You do so because you've got your eyes set on the success, not failure. That's what makes it possible. See, keep your eyes on that vision of here's where we're going. That's clear. Oh, he's right in their face and says, you get out of our way. We're going to build this thing. You got to see him doing that. It reminds me of Daniel chapter 3, verse 17, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they're about to be thrown into the fiery furnace. Where's the hope in that? And their answer is essentially this: okay, king, if you want to do it, that's fine. But know this: our God, he is able to deliver us. And then he says, but if not, we're still not going to bow down before your image. Why? Because the vision of pleasing God and of being his people was always more powerful and dominating than anything that they saw before them at that moment. They saw past the image to see the God of heaven. And that's what leaders spiritually have to be able to do to help other people do. Leaders, look beyond the problems of the present and envision a future where you not only move beyond current challenges, but where you grow to a point of achieving dreams that aren't even yet on the horizon. When you can think that big and have a plan to get there, that's when there's success. And that's when leadership has taken everything to another level. Helen Keller was once asked, what would be worse than being born blind? Her reply, to have sight without vision. After Jesus spoke with the woman at the well, crowds came out to see Jesus based upon her testimony. And in the midst of this, in a conversation with the disciples, Jesus said this: do not say there are still 4 months and then comes the harvest. Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white for harvest. That, my friends, is vision. Jesus saw the possibilities and was motivated even more to do his work on calling his disciples to do the same. I think we often get caught up in the monotony of the material, and so we lose sight of the glory of the eternal. We've got routine, we're comfortable in it, and we stop thinking about how much more it could be. We have a great purpose, my friends, and God has made us a great people. Leadership is what helps us see this for ourselves and about ourselves, so that we learn to dream big and accomplish great things. And you may be thinking, no, you're talking to somebody else, or what kind of great things do you have in mind? You've got to start by realizing what great thing was done when Jesus died on the cross for your sins. That became a stumbling block as Pat talked to us the other night, because people didn't see it as a great thing. And then you have to see it as a great thing just to listen to God and submit to him. A great thing to put your trust in him. A powerful thing to repent of your sins and put them behind you. An invigorating thing to stand with Christ and confess his name before anybody. And a wonderful thing to simply submit in baptism and have God forgive you of your sins, Acts 2:38. From there, I'm telling you, those are great things. You're helping other people enjoy that greatness is a great thing too. That matters. The work of the church that he put here for us to do, to accomplish that for others, matters. Why? Because heaven matters. And that's all we really need to know. Napoleon Hill once said, "Cherish your visions and your dreams as they are children of your soul, the blueprint of your ultimate achievements." Brethren, we have to decide who we're going to be. That starts with Scripture. That's the foundation you never leave. But then the question is, how much can we do for what the Scriptures say as a congregation of God's people? And what's holding us back? Let the answer never be, we are. If you're subject to the invitation, won't you please come while we stand and sing?